told you this was a bad deal, man!
Shut up and move!
Which way?
Over here! On your mark!
I see it! I see it! We're almost there, man! Let's go! I'm sorry! Come on!
What's up, guys? Welcome to Alpha Wolf, a Season 10 comprehensive Warwick guide, which will go over more than just builds and setups. This guide will be truly comprehensive, as I'll talk about the ins and outs of Warwick, so you can stop all the noobs with this underrated champion. So before I go any further, I should probably give some background on who I am and why I'm qualified to make a guide in Warwick, or else I'll just sound like a complete jackass. So my name is Parnellyx, and I'm a Challenger Warwick main on the strongest, most competitive, and frankly most respected server in this timeline. Of course, I'm talking North America. But since Season 8, I've almost always been the only Challenger Warwick main on any major server. And I'm going to assume that NA still counts as one, since we've been a major disappointment for a few years. But jokes and mostly realities aside, I peaked 624 LP top 50 Challenger in May of Season 8, and 700 LP Challenger a few weeks before the end of Season 9. Incidentally, I didn't end Challenger last season because I lost 300 LP a week before the season ended, but we'll forget that ever happened. And the important thing for the sake of the guide is that I was playing Warwick and Challenger games throughout the entirety of the season, so I understand his relevance in Halo. I've been maining the Wolf though since the very day that his rework was released to the live servers, and I've accumulated thousands and thousands of games along with over 3 million mastery points combined on this champion. This guide is super long, so here's a table of contents, so if you want to learn about any section in particular, or if you just want to skip over my rambling, you are of course free to do so. I do, however, recommend watching this guide in its entirety, as I think there are many things for anyone watching this to learn. Alright, let's get things started then. Alright, so now I kind of want to talk about why I made this guide in the first place, and there's multiple reasons for that. I enjoy teaching what I know, and I feel it's a little bit of my duty to come out with a guide since I'm essentially the ambassador of the Warwick community. So people have been asking for a guide from me for a while. And in Season 8, I actually made a written guide, but I decided to make this one on YouTube instead of Reddit or MobaFire like I had before, because I wanted it to be more digestible given the depth it provides. In addition to more exposure, so more people can see it and learn about Warwick. Warwick guides in general are also a bit lacking, and I'm also trying to get into streaming more this season, so a little bit to advertise my stream, which is currently at twitch.tv/lolparnellyx, although I'm working on getting it changed to just twitch.tv/parnellyx this year. So if you stop by my stream at some point, I'm sure I can encourage some of you to give Warwick a shot, since I'll have you thinking, surely I can do better than this. So make sure to stop by if you hated this video. But beyond exposure for my stream or information for the current Warwick community, I think most of all, I was actually inspired to make this guide because Warwick is by far, and I know this seems a little bit biased since I'm a Warwick main, but people that follow me know that I very rarely say anything for certain. Warwick is by far the most misunderstood champion in the entire game. I'm talking builds, playstyles, roles, strengths, weaknesses, mechanics, bugs, everything. Everything about Warwick is kind of misunderstood. It's gotten a little bit better over the last year, but the general community still lacks just a good understanding of what Warwick as a champion does. And this is even true in high-elo, as I still get told to this day that like I'm building my champion wrong or I'm playing him wrong or whatever. I don't think these things are important to clear up just for me, but I feel the community perception of this champion causes a lot of people who would like him to not play him, and people think of him as just a brain-dead tank with little playmaking potential and is just in general boring and basic like Annie or Garen, and I can't disagree more with them. I'm not gonna really act like he's close to as objectively fun as champions like Yasuo, Riven, Lee Sin, stuff like that. Like obviously those champions are like insanely fun. I still have a blast playing those champions, but Warwick is definitely underrated and he needs more appreciation for what he is. To answer this question, I'll tell you first why I enjoy the champion, and then I'll talk further about why you might be interested beyond those points. So haters, they might ask how it's possible for a human being like me to enjoy Warwick, let alone play him for thousands and thousands of games, but honestly it isn't that complicated, as I've thought about the 3 main reasons to simplify why I was drawn to this champion in the first place. So the first and the main hook being Q outplays, and I'll go into more detail about Warwick mechanics later on in this guide, but I fell in love with Warwick's Q, Jaws of the Beast, when I saw his initial ability reveal. It's everything that I love about an ability, and it's very versatile, bread and butter spell. The main thing I enjoy about it is the ability to follow blink, stashes, and the ability to avoid displacements as well. There's a lot of different categories of mechanics in this game that determine how you outplay your opponent, and I enjoy them all. So examples would be like landing skill shots, canceling animations, comboing spells, dodging attacks, and other stuff like that. But my favorite types of outplays are based around timing. Abilities that you need to use at the right time to get the full value out of the spell. So this includes stuff like Fior's Parry, Yasuo's Wind Wall, Mastery's Alpha Strike, and especially Warwick's Jaws of the Beast. They're kind of high risk, high reward spells. I started to play a lot of Master Yi in Season 4 when I was blown away by a concept tutorial which showed me the playmaking potential of Alpha Strike, so it only makes sense that I'm attracted to Warwick's Q as well. The type of skill expression that you get out of Warwick is definitely the main pull for me. Second, chasing low health enemies and securing kills is super satisfying for me. I absolutely hate it, just completely despise it when someone recalls with 100 health or less and they get away with it. So I want to be able to snipe them across the map, or even better and more reliably, chase them and guarantee the kill myself. Third, I enjoy turning fights. One of my backup junglers is actually Kled, and yes, I said Kled jungle, so you can see what I mean with this. Being low in health and coming out on top in a 1v1 or 1v2 is really hype for me, and Warwick does this very often since his lifesteal doesn't kick in until he's super low in health, so yeah. So if any of these things are up your alley, then you might want to go ahead and give Warwick a shot. And if they aren't, that's fine too. Just whatever your favorite moments are in the game, try to find a champion that does those things most often or to find your main. Here's a list of some other reasons why you might like Warwick. Finally, we get to talk about the content of the guide. So here we are. To start off, we'll talk about abilities. And do know I'm not going to explain what, like, all the details of what Warwick's abilities do. You can look that up if you like, but I will explain kind of the purpose in his kit, along with how you should use the abilities to maximum effectiveness given different situations. So to start off, we'll talk about Warwick's passive, which is called Eternal Hunger, and this passive is extremely good for the jungle. It gives you extra on-hit damage, which scales well with attack speed, but more than that, it gives you infinite sustain in the jungle, and allows you to constantly farm solo dragons, tank baron, skirmish, duel, and fight with lower health than you normally would. Overall, it's a very solid passive, but it's nothing too flashy. Warwick's Q is called Jaws of the Beast, and like I said earlier, this is your bread and butter ability. Not only is it your main damage spell, but it's also your main survivability tool, as you heal a lot from this. And it allows you to essentially duel most champions of the game, unless they're fed, on top of allowing you to survive team fights and skirmish. Also, this ability is your main way of closing the gap, following dashes and blinks and ignoring some forms of CC. So mastering Warwick's Q usage is the first step to becoming good at Warwick, since it's such a versatile spell. Warwick's W is called Blood Hunt, and this defines Warwick for what he is, a hunter. The ability is very unique and also versatile in the sense that it allows you to fight enemies, clear camps, scout, and gank. This ability can be used to scout enemies in the fog of war, making it easier to invade and avoid getting caught or counter gank, and on top of just many other things. It's very strong as it allows you to gank and chase people down as well. Almost no one can outrun a Warwick, especially if they're below 25% health. And lastly, it gives you an insane attack speed buff on marked targets that allows you to duel, clear, and fight enemies. But do note that this ability is bugged, and I'll talk about that more later on in the guide. Warwick's E is called Primal Howl, and it's Warwick's main defensive tool as opposed to, his inherent lifesteal, but it can also be used aggressively as well. The main usages for the skill include, using it to CC enemies, to tank damage, and engage, along with others. But using this in conjunction with your Q will allow you to fear a target backwards, and it makes it harder for an enemy to escape. Generally speaking though, this ability is a one-point wonder and is powerful throughout the entirety of the game. Warwick's ultimate is Infinite Duress, and this is Warwick's main lockdown tool, as it has just a fairly low cooldown for an ultimate ability, especially going into late game, and it's extremely powerful if you land it. Not only is it a super strong suppression for locking down carries and making picks, but it also does a respectable amount of damage and heals Warwick for all the damage dealt, meaning you can easily heal for up to 600 to 800 health over the duration and become significantly harder to kill. Do note though, you should not be afraid to use this as an escape. It's a pretty low cooldown for an ultimate, and you're immune to CC during the dash. And I'll go into more depth with this in the mechanics section, but since it's just a free get out of jail for free card, so you shouldn't be afraid to play a little bit more aggressive and consider this as an escape tool. You usually want to start Q level 1 since it gives you the most damage for clearing camps, alongside fight and power in case a fight happens early. Level 2, you'll usually take W for clear speed, and then take E level 3. This is just going to be the standard ability order you should be using in at least 95% of your games. Some of the other skill order options include taking W first and Q second, if you want to scout out opponents if you suspect they will invade, so if they have a blitzcrank or something like that, for example. In this situation, you should level W first and then press it in order to see if you can mark the surrounding area and catch someone with a blood trail so that you can spot them and avoid getting caught out. You also have the ability to go Q into E, which is something I've been doing the last year a little bit, as assuming I think I can successfully gank a lane level 2, or if I'm invading and I think I can fight the enemy level 2. The reason you prefer E over W in these situations is that E gives you the ability to stick onto your enemies early without getting kited, but I don't really do this much often anymore since farming until level 3 is more consistent in Season 10. Afterwards, for any of these options, you should max out your W first, followed by Q, and then lastly E. Obviously, you're going to put points in your ultimate whenever you can. Some people think going 3 points into W into Q max is best, but I've never really been a fan of it, as I think just putting points in W just gives you so much. Other people might wonder why I don't max Q on Warwick since it's my bread and butter ability, and the reason is that putting points in it doesn't offer too much. Its damage hardly increases and the cooldown stays the same while the mana cost goes up. The main benefit for leveling up Q is the increased healing, but it's outclassed by what W has to offer, as points in it decreases the cooldown, increases movement speed, increases your attack speed, and it just gives you just so much more all around. This means that you can roam and gank better, while also getting more attack speed for fighting champions and also clearing camps. While you normally max E last, you also have the option to actually max seconds instead of Q after your W, if you want to take less burst damage and not rely on sustain as much. So if you're running into fights and you're dying in like 4 seconds, you aren't really benefiting from the increased healing that points in Q has to offer, so you might as well just increase your damage reduction to help you survive this fights a little bit longer. If you have any doubts though, I would just max Q second every single time.
Yeah, I'm gonna go under.
Yeah. Whoa.
Oh, what? I have no heal. Oh my god, what the fuck?
What is this?
What?
Wow, this mechanic.
Holy. Bye. Jeez.
Wow.
That was actually.
Really?
That's
Never
pretty
seen
nuts.
this before.
I know.
The mention of Warwick mechanics are something that turn a lot of heads since people think it isn't work for scrubs. But the reality is that Warwick actually has a lot of playmaking potential that is crucial to execute in most games. Like, yeah, Warwick doesn't really require much of a brain to play if you're going full tank and you're just pressing E, spamming Q off cooldown. So mechanics won't be as important if they're going tank, but they're still also going to matter if you want to carry games and play the champion to his highest potential. They're especially important if you're buying Warrior, since you're going to be squishier and your goal will probably side with assassinating or killing a target over just soaking damage. Warwick isn't really like mechanically intensive per se. It's just that what I mean by that is you aren't constantly focusing on combos or animation cancels to farm or trade, but he has a lot of big playmaking potential that can turn fights, which is one of the main reasons that I main this champion in the first place, like I said earlier. The main source of your mechanical outplays will be your Q along with your R, but I'll list off every mechanic that I feel is relevant. For every mechanic, and for the sake of this video, I'll show on your screen a number 1 to 5 that indicates the usability or the importance of the ability. So 1 being rarely used, not impactful, and 5 being commonly used and super impactful. The first combo to learn isn't hard at all, but it's something that you definitely need to know because you're going to be using it all the time, and it's just simply Q plus Tiamat active. This will cancel the Tiamat active animation and increase your burst. Warwick's Q is where a large part of his outplay potential comes from, since the ability is so versatile. For starters, there's the Q follow. If you hold Q on a target and they flash, blink, or dash while you are attached, you will follow them to their location. And this is how Warwick keeps up with the League of Dashes, and how you can avoid getting kited and giving up kills. Remember, it literally follows everything, and this includes stuff like Bard Tunnel, Fizz's Playful Trickster, his E, Blast Cone, and even globals like Teleport or Shinalt, even if the follow has like really buggy visuals. It's all about timing your Q at the right time by predicting when you think the enemy wants to use your mobility spell. So for example, if they are low in health and they're walking toward the wall, they're probably going to try to flash with the wall. The key is to just try your best to consider what the opponent might be thinking. Similarly, Warwick can use his Q to avoid displacements such as knockups and knockbacks. And for some reason, it also includes Bard R and Zoe E, but it makes sense when you think about it, since when Zoe's Sleepy Trouble Bubble puts you to sleep, you're essentially displaced from Summoner's Rift for about 30 seconds. But anyways, Warwick Q can avoid displacements, which allows for big outplay potential versus champions like Yasuo. Unlike using Q to follow dashes, you can actually avoid knockups by just tapping Q, but I'd still recommend that you hold it since it increases the duration in which you're immune to these effects. Besides that, it's just like the previous mechanic I mentioned, and something that I appreciate since it helps Warwick keep up with this ever so lasting addition of bullshit champions with mobility and knockups and stuff like that. It is worth mentioning that some spells will stun Warwick instead of just like, be avoided if Warwick uses Q. So for example, it's basically useless versus Gragasy since you just get stunned. And for Orianna's R, you don't get pulled by her ball, but you still get stunned by her ultimate. And I can't really explain which abilities do this. It's just kind of different individually. I think it's most common with older champions. So you just have to figure it out by experience or just by watching specifically on my stream. Holding Warwick Q can also be used as a mini dash to close the gap and create some distance. You'd actually be surprised as to how often I use this, so it's definitely worth considering and utilizing. One cool tip for catching up to enemies who are slightly out of range of you is to press E, dash through an enemy like minion, for example, with Q, and then fear the champion to catch up. It's a pretty smooth mechanic, and it'll usually catch enemies off guard because they just assume that Warwick can't close the gap like that. One useful trick that I discovered with Warwick a while back is to abuse how his blood trail paths around terrain in order to gain the movement speed, even when not explicitly heading in that direction. I use this often when I'm moving around my jungle since there's a lot of terrain to make it work consistently. So for example, I can W to mark the enemy mid laner and move faster from my bot side jungle to my top side jungle if I click like I'm heading towards mid lane. This interaction works because I can't walk through walls and your blood trail has to path around terrain as well. It's an out of combat effect, but utilizing this effectively will definitely allow you to roam the map much quicker, and it's definitely very usable in most of your games. W can also be used to track enemies. If they're marked with your W, don't keep your screen just centered on yourself. Pay attention to where the marked enemy is heading so that you can alert your team or make the next move. It's especially useful to mark the enemy jungler because you can see which camps or lane he's heading towards and predict his pathing based off of that. You can also use it to, it's active to scout brushes and to avoid invades, and you can track stealth champions as well, which is pretty big. One of Warwick's most common combos is to cast E preemptively and then hold Q on your target before fearing them with the E. This guarantees that you get the fear off since you can follow dashes with your held Q while you wait for your second part of your E to be available to use again. Warwick's ultimate has multiple uses, but the most important one is using it to avoid CC. While Warwick can be CC'd while locking down his target, he is immune to all forms of CC during the dash portion of the ability. This is important because, unlike his Q, it can negate crowd control like stuns or snares. And you can use this mechanic to escape without worrying or for sticking onto targets. So for example, if an Ashe is running away from you and chucks an arrow at you, you can actually just press R straight through her arrow and eat the damage, but avoid the stun. You can also technically pull this off in melee range since there's a slight crouch animation before Warwick starts dashing, where he is also immune to CC, but it's very, very hard to pull off. It's like a couple frames. Warwick can also use his E with his R in order to get clean engages off for his team. So if you hit a target with your ultimate while channeling your E, the fear will go off and fear surrounding enemies. You can cast E mid-air as well to get this combo off more certainly, so I'd rather just wait to use your E until you can decide after you've pressed R. It is a mechanic that I use too much, but you can definitely reap the benefits of it as you get a big AoE fear off to start a fight sometimes for your team, if your team's there to follow up. Last mechanic I'll talk about is something I started using more over the last year, which is leveraging off an enemy's blood trail to increase your ult range. This can be used to either get a longer range escape or to make a pick on a different target. So if my team is chasing down multiple people and they catch one, and I might utilize the increased ult range I get from them falling below 20% health in order to jump out and catch a different enemy who is much healthier. It'll likely be unexpected for the victim, so you can definitely use it to make free picks sometimes. The summoner spells I run every game are Flash and Smite, just like basically every other jungler. Flash is great in general though for Warwick specifically since it gives him an escape for when he doesn't have his ult, and it allows you to close the gap on enemies. I especially like flash plus Q sometimes in order to follow an enemy's dash or blink and secure a kill. You can also flash fear to engage a fight with Warwick, flash alts, and there's just many more flash combos that synergize with Warwick's kits. It's very versatile and it gives you a ton of playmaking potential, which is why everyone runs flash basically in the game. But I don't have to really go into why smite is necessary in a jungler, since obviously you can't get flamed for missing your smite if you don't have it, but I do want to highlight that I'll oftentimes smite camps early in order to bring them below the half health threshold on my W quicker, assuming I don't have to worry about the enemy, contesting the camp and stealing it from me. Also, one of Warwick's strengths is his ability to secure camps and objectives with his Q plus smite, which is really powerful in a jungler, especially early into the game. So be sure to use that to your advantage when invading or doing neutral objectives. There's also some alternative summoner spells to these, most notably Ignite, which is something I actually took a lot last season in Season 9 against champions like Olaf and Udyr, who normally just destroy me early game and are capable of preventing me from playing the game in general. So taking Ignite against, instead of Flash against these champions allows me to comfortably farm to relevancy, because if they do try to invade and fight me when it's up, Ignite just turns the duel in my favor and they just can't fight me. It's really just kind of an insurance spell that forces Udyr and Olaf to get their leads through ganking instead of just brain dead invades that I can't do anything about without teammates' help. I don't really take it though anymore, since Warwick's early clear is significantly faster in the early game, but it definitely is an option if you struggle versus those champions early on. Lastly, there is Ghost, which can be taken as an alternative to Flash, and I don't take it because I think it's just generally inferior to Flash. I do recommend it highly if you are silver or below, maybe even gold or below, since Ghost is just so easy to use and it's on a lower cooldown, so you don't have to focus on making mechanical outplays to get leads like you would have to with Flash. You can just press Ghost and you can start running at people when during a gank or a team fight or a skirmish. So definitely worth trying out if you're lower elo. For keystones, there's only really one option for the jungle, and that is press the attack. Some people I know are going to ask about any alternatives, such as Aftershock, Conquer, or Lethal Tempo, and they're all decent, but they're clearly inferior to press the attack and Warwick. Aftershock offers Warwick just great tankiness in teamfights later on into the game, but it causes him to lack a lot of damage early on and doesn't really supplement his skirmishing and dueling playstyle. Conquer is simply too hard to stack for Warwick, and it's too reliable in general. And you gotta believe me here, because I've tried to make it work. I've been in situations where I was able to pull off some crazy 1v4s, all because of the healing and damage that Conquer provided, but these pop-off plays were very, very limited. And more often than not, I would just die or I'd kill my target before I got any real value out of the rune. Plus, Warwick doesn't have any AoE, besides like Titanic Hydra, and most champions that abuse Conquer have AoE to abuse the healing that it provides. And as for Lethal Tempo, it's just too hard to stick onto my target and scrap them for 6 seconds without getting kited. Pretty self-explanatory. PTA, on the other hand, it isn't quite the perfect rune on Warwick, but it's pretty damn close. It gives you burst for ganks and short trades, along with the damage enhancement for winning duels or for exposing a key target for your team in a fight to get a kill. It gives you practically everything you want aside from, a competent bot lane, but it's super versatile and it's easy to proc while doing very noticeable damage, making it easily stronger than any of the other rune options. If you want any other keystones just to try out for fun, this is just I want to emphasize this for fun, I recommend Predator or my favorite, Phase Rush, but every one of the other runes just suck completely on this champion, so if I haven't mentioned it, it just isn't worth your time at all. Alright, so for the other runes, Triumph is going to be the first one you're going to run in the first row. It's very good for getting extra health back in skirmishes, tower dives, and team fights. It's just extra health in your pocket and it makes some plays less risky, and it synergizes really well with Warwick because Warwick is low on health oftentimes, and you heal more the lower health you are. But the other runes in this row are just generally useless for Warwick in the jungle besides, I suppose, Presence of Mind, but Warwick doesn't have any massive mana problems in the jungle thanks to his jungle item, so Triumph is just superior by far. Next, the next slot will be one of the rare choices you actually get to make with Warwick runes, which is between Legend Alacrity and Legend Tenacity. But generally you should default to Legend Alacrity since it gives you extra attack speed that just helps you clear faster and fight better. But that said, if you're against a team with a lot of heavy CC, then you can opt for Legend Tenacity instead, which gives you up to 30% tenacity, and it can be comboed with Mercury Treads in order to give you 51% tenacity overall. Last in the precision tree, you will go Last Stand as opposed to something like Coup de Grace, which is a rune that I know a lot of people think you should go in Warwick since you're often chasing people on low health, but if enemies manage to sort of barely survive an encounter with you, you should be able to just chase them down anyways. It's rarely going to make a difference securing kills. Last Stand, on the other hand, synergizes insanely well with Warwick since your healing doesn't kick in until you are low in health. This means that you'll spend most of the game under half health, which is obviously great and synergizes really well with Last Stand. It just allows you to turn fights and stuff like that, so pretty good rune overall. Warwick actually has a few choices for secondary runes, as you can take either Sorcery, Resolve, or even Domination. Normally, Sorcery is my default route because I like Transcendence from the mid-game CDR, alongside either Water Walking for the early game jungle presence, or Nimbus Cloak for the extra movement speed after using summoner spells, most notably Smite. But I like the utility that Warwick just gets out of Sorcery, so it's what I run most of the time. But you also have the option to run Resolve, which gives you more defensive stats to be able to survive longer in fights. Anytime I take Resolve, I always go with Conditioning for the extra resist in the mid to late game, and Revitalize for the enhanced healing. Generally, I'll only switch to Resolve if I'm against a lot of frontliners, such as bruisers and tanks, since I can get the most value out of Revitalize as I'm not getting kited, and I can spam my Q and heal more often and more reliably. But said, it's 2020, so you can definitely be a good citizen and go green anytime you want, if it's your preference. Lastly though, Warwick can go Domination secondary with Eyeball Collection and either Ultimate or Relentless Hunter. I never take Domination, or I very rarely ever take it, since it's just very reliant on snowballing early, but the payoff is definitely nice, and again, it's just kind of all up to your preference, so try each of these setups and see which is best for you. For rune stats, you are always going to take plus 10% attack speed, and then the rest are kind of optional. I like to take adaptive damage and scaling health most of the time, but I will switch to either double armor if I'm against a heavy AD team, or double MR if I'm against a heavy AP team, if the opportunity arises. But in general, I'd say the rune stats are pretty minimal in their impact, so don't stress out about it too much. Like, you're not going to get stuck in Silver 2 because you accidentally took plus 6 MR instead of scaling health or something like that. But before I leave the rune section, I want to mention that runes change a lot. So there's a possibility of this being outdated in the future. The only runes that have stayed the same for Warwick since the introduction of Runes Reforged is the entire primary tree, but secondary runes have definitely flip-flopped around every like 6 months or so. And as with everything else in this guide, if runes change, I will post updates in the description below. In the build section, I mentioned to get a tank item a lot, which is a broad term that I use because there are so many options for what to build depending on the situation. You know, it's all situational. Thus, I'll be diving into the specific scenarios in which you should buy each item and try to explain my thought process behind my choices. There's a lot of different items to build here, so it may be a little bit overwhelming, but I'll give you solid default options in case you don't know what to buy in given situations, and you can just kind of learn what items are best over time as you gain more game experience. To start, Wits End is garbage in Warwick. I kind of need to get that out of the way. The stats are overwhelming and it gets outclassed by other MR items, so avoid getting it even if it sounds good, because trust me, 99% of the time it really isn't. Even if it just looks like a Warwick item, it isn't really that great. Malmortius is another item to avoid buying in general. It's technically decent, but it's outclassed as well, so I don't recommend trying it since the full tank MR items are just too good in comparison, not to mention Maul Memorius is just pretty expensive. Now that I got those out of the way, we can talk about the real magic resist options, and this includes Spirit Visage, Adaptive Helm, and Abyssal Mask. All the MR items here give health, MR, and CDR, which are fantastic stats, especially for the price points. So obviously we gotta talk about Spirit Visage. It's the default MR item for Warwick, as it works in about every situation and has obvious synergy with Warwick since it just amplifies your healing. You can also buy it if you have healers in your team. So for example, if you like Soraka, it'll amplify the healing that you receive from her. And she can just make you super tanky, even if you're struck with grievous wounds. It is, however, like somewhat of an overrated item in Warwick, as you need to be able to be in range and alive to get value out of the item in the first place. So if you're getting constantly kited or you're getting blown up in fights before you can even fight back and heal, the increased healing won't have much impact on you to begin with. If you're playing against like a Fed Rumble or an Atalia, for example, and they're just shredding you, you would rather just not take damage in the first place. So Adaptive Helm is a super strong item against teams with repetitive magic damage, and it's just in general an underrated item in my opinion. The last option would be Abyssal Mask, which isn't an item that most people would think about, running with Warwick, but it's certainly effective since Warwick does mostly magic damage. And Abyssal Mask can amplify his burst in fights. But I don't really buy it for myself. I usually buy it for, if I have teammates, if I have like 2 other mage teammates in my team that can benefit from the passive. So you get max value out of it. So I don't just buy it for myself. Just keep that in mind. So while Spirit Visage is great in Warwick and is just, it's very good, obviously, don't sleep on Adaptive Helm and don't sleep on Abyssal Mask. They're also amazing magic resist options, and you should learn when each item is best. Warwick's main armor options are Deadman's Plate, Iceborne Gauntlet, Thornmail, and Randuin's Omen. So some people might ask about Frozen Heart, but buying it over Iceborne is kind of like cheating on your girlfriend's uglier twin sister, and it just does not ever make any goddamn sense. The situations in which you buy these items are generally straightforward. If there is no clear optimal armor item to buy, I'd say Deadman's and Randuin's have leverage over the others since they provide a decent amount of health alongside the armor. Deadman's gives you more map presence since it's basically boosts some ability that works in combat. I like building it versus teams with a lot of ranged champions though, so I don't get kited easily in fights. Randuin's is, in my opinion, is probably one of the most underrated items in the entire game since not only are the stats good, and not only does it reduce crits by a ridiculous amount, it also just provides a really strong active AoE slow that's always going to be OP in team fights. I usually buy this when I'm versus strong enemies that like crit, like Trenemir, Yasuo, or a bunch of ADCs. So if they have like 2+ crit champions, you for sure buy this item. Or if I want a team, just want the team fight utility of the active. I'd say this is a good default armor option if you cannot decide on what to buy. Iceborne is your CDR option. The stats aren't great, the mana is kind of wasted, but the passive synergizes with Warwick really well, and the CDR is your best friend. I like to build this when I already have some bonus health though, and I'm able to stick on enemies in fights. The CDR just isn't that strong if you're getting kited. Lastly, Thornmail is obviously good for anti-healing and reflecting damage. If multiple auto attackers are attacking you in a fight, and it could just make it super annoying for them since you just negate some of their healing and deal damage back to them. So overall, the armor options are less situational than the MR options, and they can still be good even if you can't utilize the full effect of the items. Tiamat is of course essential to Warwick. It allows you to clear camps fast in addition to push out lanes. And the extra AD it grants is excellent since you have such high attack speed, and you'll also have great AD ratios on your Q and your R. One underrated aspect about Tiamat in Warwick is it gives you extra burst damage, as you can use Q plus Tiamat in order to cancel the Tiamat animation and get more damage in up front. Trust me, I did try in the beginning of Season 10 to make no Tiamat, skipping Tiamat work, and it just is a little bit inferior for sure. Also, Skirmisher Saber, aka Red Smite, is crucial for Warwick because you gain extra mana regen in the jungle from the jungle item the Header's Talisman part of it, and it gives you a ridiculously overpowered summoner spell on a low cooldown. Like seriously, Blue Smite is okay, but and there's no issues with going Blue Smite on Warwick technically, but it's nowhere near as strong as Red Smite since the damage reduction and bonus damage has unlimited uses for you unless you 1v1 most junglers in the game, so I always go Red Smite. So your boot options is going to be between Ninja Tabi, Mercury Treads, Boots of Mobility, Boots of Lucidity, and Sorcerer's Shoes. Your priority is going to get either one of the tank boot options if they are valuable in your game. So Ninja Tabi is excellent versus teams with multiple auto attackers, which is honestly pretty common. But if you're worried about stuns, then go ahead and grab Mercury Treads, and you can even run Legend Tenacity with it in order to the rune, in order to hit 51% tenacity in the mid to late game. I will say though that you don't want to build tank boots for the resist. You want to build them for the passive specifically. So yeah, just like keep that in mind. If you don't get value out of the passive, then you should be looking at the other boot options if they're also kind of decent. So Boots of Mobility is another option if you want to snowball the mid game. These boots will help you move around faster and have longer ult range. Boots of Lucidity has been one of my favorite boots in the last year because they're one of the cheapest boot options in the game, and they provide CDR in addition to lowering your summoner spell cooldown. Just cheap CDR, and CDR is a great stat in Warwick. Lastly, there's Sorcerer's Shoes, which might come to a surprise to some people. I don't build these actually that often, but Warwick does do mostly magic damage, so they do have a place, especially if your team lacks magic damage, or you don't expect the enemy team to build any MR, and also, of course, if the other boot options aren't really OP in the game. Tankwick is the first Warwick build I would discuss, and it's by far the most popular ability you will find out there. It's extremely noob friendly and forgiving, and it can still be useful later on in the game if you're behind. I recommend this build highly if you're starting off with Warwick and you don't have his mechanics down, or if you just have a fed carry in your team that you can just frontline for in fights. Despite my distaste for this build, I will still go it sometimes, just because it's a really safe option if you don't feel like you need to carry, if you have like a teammate who's fed, or if you feel like you just can't carry, so if you're like hard countered. I like to compare Warwick building tank generally to the likes of like Lee Sin or Rek'Sai, but honestly, Warwick is significantly better at being a tank than them because of his % health damage on his Q and his CC on his E and his ult. After your core items, you will build into Cinderhawk, which gives you extra AoE from the burn, on top of the bonus health that scales well with other health items you get. The Cinderhawk honestly kind of sucks initially after you buy it though, as the flat health you get is somewhat low and it takes time for it to scale. It's the main reasons why bruiser junglers in the game at the moment, like Jarvan or Olaf, generally will build like Warrior over it. I think Cinderhawk just sucks right now and is super underpowered, but still it provides the most gold value later on into the game, and it makes you massively tanky if you manage to get to 5 or 6 items. When building a tank on Warwick, I recommend that you just get as close to 40% CDR as possible, since you'll have the beefiness to reliably spam your spells in fights, and remember, CDR is Warwick's best friend. After Tiamat and Cinderhawk, I will build either Ninja Tabi or Merc Treads usually for boots, and then I'll rush into Spirit Visage or Iceborne Gauntlet, depending on which type of resist I need first. Spirit Visage is replaceable by the other MR items, of course, if they are better in the situation, but Iceborne is I generally consider Iceborne core in this build, unless you are versus a very heavy AP team, because you want the CDR to be useful. After these 2 items, you can upgrade your Tiamat into Titanic Hydra if you want it to get more damage, and then finish it off with another tank item. The item choices in order can be changed, of course, but this is just a solid example build for Tankwick as a whole. I have been in love with the Warrior enchant on Warwick since the end of Season 7, and I just think that it's Warwick's best jungle item, period. It's going to be especially true if you're trying to carry the game, but it's extremely underrated, as a lot of people aren't even aware that it's an option at all. They just think you just always go Cinderhawk. I always talk about this item. I always talk about how good it is, how good I think it is, maybe a little bit too much so. And maybe with the buff to Cinderhawk, Warrior won't be as good in comparison, but the item has certainly worked for me very, very well in the last 3 years. And there's two primary reasons to why I love Warrior and why it's my favorite item to build on Warwick. First of all, it amplifies Warwick's strongest point in the game, the mid game. And second of all, I'm not a pussy and I know you aren't either, and you want to carry some games. So the Warrior enchant is what I build as my core jungle item in about 95% of my games because of its mid game power spike and its efficient stats. And there's a reason as to why I build attack damage in Warwick over something like Blood Razor, which gives me on-hit damage. Because historically Warwick's been about on-hit damage, right? But since his rework, he lost a lot of his on-hit efficiency. And in addition, Warwick has amazing AD scalings, which is something that most people are just kind of unaware of. His Q has a 1.2 AD ratio on a roughly 4 to 5 second cooldown, and his ultimate has a 1.7 AD ratio, while his W grants him just a shit ton of attack speed, which is effectively an AD ratio on its own. And another thing that people kind of forget is that Warwick's Q and his ultimate heal based off of the damage dealt, which means that you have more sustain and more healing by building more damage. Warrior also grants CDR, which is one of Warwick's best stats regardless of what you build. And these factors just combined give Warwick a super massive power spike once you buy Warrior, because all the stats are all front loaded. You just get them instantly. You don't have to wait like Cinderhawk. And it often just makes you the strongest champion on the map after the purchase. This allows you to be super proactive in the mid game and snowball the game before late game hits. I also usually build this item even when I'm behind though, as the extra damage allows me to kill squishies way faster and make picks on my own to come back. But just think of the reasons to why you build Warrior on champions like Lee Sin, Olaf, Rek'Sai, etc. They can go Cinderhawk and they can be tanky, but that's not why you're going to pick these champions in this meta. They have great AD scaling, and building Warrior allows them to snowball the game when they're at their strongest point. And the same applies to Warwick. And while he might not be as early game focused as champions like Lee Sin and Rek'Sai or Olaf, he's still superior in the mid game before team fights really start breaking out. And the AD carries, the backline carries start getting items, and tanks get tanky. So what do I do after I build Warrior? More damage? Well, actually, I do have more of a damage-heavy build, the Zombiewick build I'll talk about afterwards. But the build that I've been running since Season 7, when I started building Warrior, is Warrior into tank items. So I usually go tanky after my Warrior. Specifically, I like Deadman's Plate. It was my favorite item for a while. I don't always go Deadman's Plate. You can go other tank items, but it's a good default. It not only does it provide you with some luscious armor and health stats, but the movement speed it provides is comparable to that of Boots of Mobility, and it works in combat. Warwick is a champion that struggles to close the gap. Usually he doesn't struggle to stick onto people, but closing the gap certainly. And Deadman's Plate helps significantly with that. Even if you get damage and your Bloodhound's movement speed goes away, Deadman's Plate will still be boosting you, and it can allow you to catch targets that are trying to kite you, so it's really good versus teams with a lot of ranged champions. So don't sleep on the out-of-combat movement speed, as you can roam around the map very, very quickly, which is super important as a jungler, obviously. And the reason, this is the reason that I buy it early on, as it's usually around the mid-game that I get this item, and the map is still going to be spread out. And the more open the map is, the more effective the movement speed is. It allows you to gank lanes and make picks. The zombie build is the build that I use throughout most of Season 9, and is currently my default build in Season 10 because of how well it suits the meta. Specifically, it's really good at ending games at around the 20 to 30 minute mark versus teams with a lot of burst and aren't that classic front to back team comp. The major strengths of this build is that Guardian Angel and even the stopwatch when you're building into it are able to provide you with a sort of artificial tankiness while you're building enough damage to be a massive threat. With stopwatch, it can become gold for 2 seconds, which is excellent news if you're silver below. But the invulnerability can stall for your cooldowns and also cause enemies to either waste time waiting for you or cause them to change their focus entirely. Once you finish your GA, it's even stronger since the enemy team will essentially have to kill you twice in a team fight. And that's extremely difficult when you consider that you're spamming your E and you're constantly healing. And that's another thing, since you have a ton of AD with this build, you heal way more than any other build. So you'll have extremely high damage that makes you a kill threat versus almost any target, while healing for nearly a third of your health every time you press Q. And if the enemies do focus and burst you down, then you'll just revive a few seconds later after forcing out all their most important spells. It's essentially a catch-22 for the enemy team since you're too strong to ignore, but focusing down is way too difficult. Another one of the main benefits of this build is that you generally get your Guardian Angel before the 20-minute mark, which is, of course, when the Baron spawns. Having the passive up greatly increases your odds of winning the next team fight, which can result in an early Baron. And of course, taking an early Baron is crucial for your team if they intend to throw their lead and lose the game. But when you have your GA, you don't want to waste the passive. It's a long 5-minute cooldown and it's your main form of survivability that you have in team fights. So if a major objective's coming up soon, you need to play it safe and not risk getting the passive burns, or else you'll just risk losing the next fight and the objective that comes with it. The idea behind the build as a whole is that you have enough damage to be a massive threat, enough CDR to spam your spells, and enough artificial tankiness to make it impossible for you to get one shot, plus you have really good sustain. And lastly, there's the psychological advantage you have with this build, which is obviously very, very, very crucial for solo queue. When enemies press tab and they see that their jungler is getting shafted, and I mean completely annihilated, by a full AD Warwick, you know, they're probably not going to say very nice things. I mean, they could say some positive stuff like, keep your head up, you'll bounce back, you know, don't worry about it, but it's solo queue, so realistically, they'll call him dog shit, and they're going to tear him apart like he divorced their daughter and took the kids. So to summarize, the build's going to start off a little bit like Warriorwick, going Tiamat into Warrior, but you'll often go for Boots Lucidity for your boots, since they are a cheap form of CDR, and you can still go Tabbies or Merc Treads if they're really good in the given game, but I'd say that I go Boots Lucidity about 70% of the time, just because you really like the CDR in this build. But after that, you rush into the main item, obviously behind this build, Guardian Angel, and then you follow it up with items like Titanic Hydra, Spirit Visage, Sterix Gauge, or any of the tank item options such as Randons or Thornmail. And you can build any of these in any order, but these are just the most common items that I build after my Guardian Angel. When I'm actually building into the Guardian Angel, I usually prioritize the BF Sword first since it's the most cost efficient, but I will go into a Chain Vest if I'm versus lethality champions or, you know, a heavy AD team, or I'll go Stopwatch if I think a fight might happen soon since I value the impactful active. Sterix can be a good item to prevent you from getting bursted easily. Titanic will give you the most damage while also keeping you beefy, and Spirit Visage is really good if you just need the MR and the healing. So there are some other builds that I wanted to go into more detail with in this guide before, but I just want to make them brief now because I don't really build them much anymore. So for starters, there's the Bruiser build, which is going Cinderhawk into Bruiser items like Triforce, Titanic Hydra, and Sterix Gauge. This build technically has the most carry potential since you'll have amazing damage while also being nearly unkillable. But the issue with it is that it's a super expensive build and it takes a little bit to scale up, so I normally don't like it considering just games are just getting shorter and shorter over time. If your games are regularly going past 30 minutes though, then it is an option considering it does provide Warwick with the best late game potential. And I mean, I still run it, I guess technically every once in a while, but it's pretty rare, and usually when I do, it's when I'm playing on a Smurf account where games don't close out very quickly and I just want more late game 1v5 potential. But lastly, there is the Death's Dance build, which you can see in plenty of the clips in this video. It's technically the original variation of the zombie build, but with Death's Dance before the Guardian Angel. And this build has crazy highlight potential, and it's super fun if it manages to work out. But just because you can like solo carry fights and do massive damage and heal a ton and not die, but there's very clear issues with it, as anti-healing is super effective versus it, and if Warwick gets kited or CC'd, it just makes you way too easy to kill, and because you won't have anything to heal off of. I ran it a lot actually in season 9, and I'm not sure why, but just started to feel, I've just been starting to feel useless every time I build it recently, in the last like 8 months honestly. I'm gonna assume it's just because of the meta shifts, but the builders just felt overly expensive because, you know, you put so much gold into Death's Dance before you build any defensive items. And it just makes it way too squishy to ever fight or, yeah, really commit to any big fights. So maybe it'll feel good again in the future, but currently I don't really recommend running it in your ranked games. Whenever I've looked at guides in the past, one of the most frustrating things that I found was they never really told me how to play the champion. So surely I knew the builds, the runes, the mechanics, or whatever the guide showed me, but they never really taught me why I should play the champion to begin with. I want to know what I'm playing for. When should I feel powerful? When should I feel weak, and why? And how do I play towards my goals? So, you know, a bronze player can copy Faker's builds and they'll still be bronze. And similarly, I can copy my own builds and still just play impressively suboptimal. I hope that I can explain these concepts as clearly as I can, because if you just follow my builds or you practice the mechanics, none of it will matter in the end if you aren't playing how you should, and it's probably one of the most confusing parts about learning a new champion. I'll also talk more specifically about roles in a team fight after, but this section is intended for basically everything else. I'm not going to show you camp by camp the routes I do, because if I did, you'd probably just get really bored and you'd stop watching the video. So instead, I'll summarize what options you have for the first clear and what circumstances you'd want to choose them. If you want to see the routes visually, I linked a Warwick jungle routes video in the description that shows me full clearing. Also, if the jungle happens to change drastically while this guide is still relevant, I will replace the jungle routes video with a new one, and most information I'm talking about would just probably be ignorable. So there are 4 jungle routes that I use in the Season 10 jungle. And if you're watching this from the future, this is before Riot implemented the Pepsi Max Dragon and the 8 roaming baby heralds, or whatever the hell they decided to implement. But none of these routes are really that complicated. They are Blue Rush, Blue Full Clear, Red Rush, and the Invade route. So the first clear I want to talk about is going to be the Blue Full Clear, which is what I consider my bread and butter clear, and I recommend for about honestly anyone. It's just very reliable, it's very safe, and very straightforward. It is a simple, basic, full clear route, and it goes blue to Gromp to Wolves to Red to Raptors to Scuttle Crab. And so yeah, like I said, this is just a very simple route, and the goal of it is to kind of establish yourself early game. It allows you to farm as effectively as possible and efficiently as possible, so that you can get your team out early on, and that's when you're actually kind of a strong champion. So it's just very safe, very reliable, and I recommend it a lot for anyone in solo queue. Next, there is the Blue Rush, which is this will allow you to apply more pressure in the early game, and it's essentially the same thing as the Blue Full Clear, except for you skip Wolves early on. So it goes blue to Gromp to Red into either a gank and invade, or you can just continue clearing your camps. So this is also a very, very, very safe, reliable route, but it sets yourself up so that you can go for the ganks or an invades early on, except for you do miss out one Wolves, so it's not as efficient technically with clearing. So if you want to apply pressure in the early game, go for this one. I do recommend, this is something that I do. I guess if you're diamond or above, you could consider this. If you're not, I think it's a little bit too complicated. You don't want to have to overthink, I guess. But something that I do is I will start blue, do Gromp, and then I'll look at the opposite side of the map to see if there's a gank opportunity or an invade opportunity. And if there is, then I will just do the Blue Rush route. I'll skip my Wolves and I'll go to Red, get level 3, and then I can go for the gank or the invade. But if I don't, if like the lanes aren't pushing in a way that makes me think that I'll be able to get anything off, then I'll just continue with the Blue Full Clear, do my Wolves, and then just continue farming as efficiently as possible. So you have that ability to kind of adapt midway through the route. Next, there is the Red Rush, which is essentially just the Blue Rush, just backwards. You start Red, you go to Blue, then you do Gromp, and then you look for a gank, invade, or a clear. I don't like this as much as the Blue Rush in the sense that starting Red on Warwick and then going to your blue side is a little bit inefficient, because if you don't find a gank opportunity, then you waste a little bit of time walking back to your red side jungle, but it's still a pretty good route if you want to gank the opposite side of the map early. So I will do this if I want to, if I think that I can like gank top, for example, and starting bot is my red buff, then I'll go for that. So it really just kind of depends on how like the lanes are and how you want to predict things will turn out. Lastly, there is the invade route, and I don't recommend this in low elo at all. I don't recommend this for many people who are inexperienced with Warwick. It's not like necessarily complicated, it's just a very risky route, and you gotta kind of like understand your jungle matchups and what you suspect junglers will do in their clears. So this is something that is good at just punishing enemy junglers to greed and take their entire red side jungle. So for example, Kayn, because you can just take their blue side jungle. So what I do here is I start red, I invade and take the enemy blue, take the enemy Gromp, and I hit level 3. And then you can either you can continue, you can take the enemy wolves as well. I don't really recommend this. I think it's kind of greedy. Normally what I do is I go back to my own blue side jungle, or I gank. This jungle route I actually did a lot in the last season, season 9, but because junglers generally do buff to buff nowadays, it's a lot riskier to pull off. So you gotta kind of know your jungle matchups more. But if you're just picking up Warwick or your below diamond in general, I recommend that you just use 1 or 2 of the routes that I mentioned so that you can stay consistent with your gameplay. Don't overcomplicate anything. Don't overthink anything. Just stay to like 1 or 2 routes and just stick with it. Like I said, I recommend doing the blue full clear if anything, so that should be your default. You can certainly throw in the blue rush or the red rush as well if you want to mix things up, but like I said, I just don't recommend the invade routes. It's just super risky and situational. So stay away from that until you gain experience and you understand what Warwick can do and what he's capable of. Warwick's clearing is somewhat fast before Tiamat until you get to Raptors and Krugs. You can definitely and you should do Krugs and Raptors in your first clear since Warwick has infinite sustain, but your clear speed doesn't really become good overall until you have your Tiamat. Also, it's worth noting that when doing Raptors without Tiamat, you should be focusing the small ones first, or else they will actually beat the fuck out of you. You can actually die if you start the camp low enough. I've died once to Raptors before, which is really embarrassing as Warwick jungle. But some tips for clearing the jungle include smiting a camp at full health in order to leash the camp towards you, and also to bring the monster closer to below the 50% health threshold to trigger your W's attack speed. You can also avoid using your Q on monsters below 50% health if you are low on mana, just to manage your mana. And here is an important one: never use your E versus jungle monsters, period. Since you have infinite sustain anyways, and it'll just end up wasting mana and put the ability on cooldown. People do this all the time, and there technically is a situation where you can use E in the jungle, but just like don't even think about it for a long time, because it's honestly just a waste of time and mana and cooldown. Warwick's objective taking is definitely one of his major strengths. It goes without saying, since he has the infinite sustain to be able to solo, herald, and dragon at every stage of the game. The only time you can actually die to dragon is if you're like level 3, you have no items, and you're Oom. That's like the only time you can actually die to it. Therefore, you should look to take them if you are if either your nearby lanes are ahead and they're pushing, or you can look to sneak it if you believe the enemy jungler is on the opposite side of the map and there isn't any vision in the pits. One thing I do though is when I tilt really hard, I just force dragon when the odds are blatantly stacked against me, and I would not recommend that. I do that shit all the time. You should just avoid that completely. Jungle hierarchy is a term that I use in order to describe a general jungle concept that can be applied to all junglers, not just Warwick. So it's kind of like coaching at this point. But the premise is that you should almost always be trying to kill or destroy something besides your teammates' morale. Junglers just need to chill sometimes, but without wasting too much time. This is especially true in the Season 10 jungle, since catch-up XP got heavily nerfed, so any time wasted is heavily punished. The jungle hierarchy is kind of a list to generalize what you should prioritize if given multiple opportunities, and jungle is the role of having to judge what you should do given multiple opportunities. It goes, a tower is more important than a dragon or a herald, which is more important than a kill, which is more important than counter jungling 1 or 2 camps, which is more important than farming your own jungle. It's just kind of a measure of risk versus reward, and keep in mind this is all early game. This concept is very generalized, and you still need to figure out what the most effective move would be in a given situation. Then, you know, things change. If your team's grouping for dragon, do dragon over a tower or something like that. But this is something that you can turn to if you find yourself tilted or you're unfocused and you end up tunneling on over farming, over ganking, or generally inefficient pathing. It's meant to kind of keep your priorities in line. You're probably wasting your time if you're going out of your way to accomplish things, especially if they aren't guaranteed. So, for example, if you're running across the map from Warwick to kill someone and you have all the tools to secure it, it's probably a good idea. But if you're moving from bot to top in order to potentially gank someone that you aren't even sure will be successful, then it's likely just a waste of time, especially in solo queue, since you can't really predict what your teammates or your enemies are going to do all the time. It's all about measuring the risk and reward of the opportunities around you and not overcommitting to certain objectives when the odds of success are low. That's just kind of just a general concept that everyone should know. Warwick's approach to ganks are pretty straightforward since he lacks a dash or anything that could allow him to creatively approach his victim most of the time, so you usually should just try to gank from behind. That said, gank selection and how you actually play out the ganks is extremely crucial to capitalizing on early game gank opportunities. If the enemy laner is bleeding out their ass, then you are incentivized to look that direction because you will gain massive movement speed to approach the gank much quicker, and the faster you are, the harder it is for the enemy to react and back off, in addition to the fact that you'll have increased attack speed right away against that target. And if the enemy is below 20% health, you should definitely consider ganking that lane, you know, assuming there's not much obvious risk, since you'll just be zooming faster than if your girl texts you, parents aren't home, and you can almost always just kill them, straight up. You don't even really consider your ult, which is obviously just very, very strong for ganking, as it's a gap closing, range suppression tool that does damage, and is good in basically nearly every situation for ganks. When your ult is up, you should just definitely look for ganks more, since your normal limitations of being immobile and not having good initiation tools for it is just removed, especially if I have a blood trail on them. Playing out ganks properly is probably where most Warwick players make mistakes, since they rush using their abilities and they don't think ahead or in general, which is of course a quality often associated with League of Legends players. Yes, Warwick's Q does damage, and yes, his R does suppress his target, but it doesn't mean that you need to use them immediately during a gank. If you are first in every gank, not only do you risk missing it completely and doing a walk of shame back to your jungle, but you also risk missing out on a kill because the enemy escapes after by like flashing away or something. It's a gap closer, so if you can get onto a target without needing to use it to begin with, and you can hold it for when you really need it, that is going to be often ideal. It can also be used to bait out spells out of targets only for you to ult and heal back up, or to cancel CC that gets thrown at you. In addition, you can save it for either another gank in the future, or for turning a counter gank around if the enemy jungler comes out to help feed his laner's opponent. It's a really versatile spell, so consider the situation and use it the best you can. Just make sure to not hold it for too long like I do and die like an idiot. But what I just said about Warwick's R can basically be said about Warwick's Q, since it has multiple uses. Don't just spam enough cooldown for the damage. It's your main form of sticking onto your opponent by following dashes, avoiding displacements, or by dashing through minions, so that should almost always be the priority first. You must see Warwick's Q as a utility spell, first things first, and a damage spell second. You should also use your W before you get in vision range of the enemy if you're ganking enemies above 50% health, since if you use your W too early, they'll know you're hunting them and they'll back off, and if you use it too late, you'll just be slower to close the gap. A lot of people say that a jungler can't and shouldn't split push, but I say that they don't want you to have trick QG. Now, surely there's a lot of reasons as to why you don't split push as a jungler, and I'm not going to suggest that you start playing like Master Yi and, you know, in the side lane with Warwick, but I am going to say that taking the side lane in certain scenarios is actually super beneficial for your champion. First of all, your ability to duel and run down split pushers is outstanding. So if an assassin like Zed tries to take the side lane thinking they can kill whoever they want, then you can usually just go smack the ego out of them. Warwick duels super well, and he has the ability to secure kills on lone targets super well, and this is important to emphasize. Not only can he duel people well, he can run them down and make sure that they don't get away. So even though your teammates may not like it, you should often be considered for matching a split pusher, you know, obviously assuming you can actually kill them. Second of all, one of the biggest problems with matching a split push as a jungler is that they can always just TP away to a fight when you're just stuck with smite. So Warwick doesn't see this as an issue, however, since you can hold Q in order to follow the laner's TP and join the fight with them, or you can CC them in order to prevent their TP from going off in the first place. You might be thinking, you know, won't they just hide in a bush or, you know, go to the fog of war so that you can't cancel their TP? And yes, they'll probably try to do this, but if you use W, you can track where they're going and not get juked out by the fog of war. If you catch the enemy TPing, you have the option to either cancel or follow, and the decision is based on who you think will be stronger in the fight. So for example, if you think a Fed Jax will run over your team, cancel his TP and try to escape. If you think you can follow and win the fight, then hold Q. So just use your own judgment to determine what's best. I don't really rely on matching a split pusher like this, you know, like trying to rely on TPs and stuff that much, but it is worth mentioning. It is an option that I occasionally do it. Lastly, Warwick is horrible at sieging, and in any given scenario, whether you're pushing into the enemy base or they're pushing into your turret, Warwick is just absolutely terrible in this scenario. He has no range, doesn't really have any wave clear, and he doesn't want to engage face first without a good angle, or else he'll just get blown up and end up CCing useless targets. So as a result, you should often look to take a flank position. So for example, if my team is sieging the mid turret with Baron, and we can't just blatantly tower dive the enemies, I will often shove in the top lane or the bot lane and pressure the side. This will force the enemies to deal with me because the lane's pushing in. And this also gives me the ability to flank and reach the back line if my team wants to engage a fight or they get engaged on, which is significantly a more favorable position than diving in face first. Similarly, if you're getting sieged on, you shouldn't just be sitting under the turret doing nothing and getting poked out. You should try to find a position around the enemy team so that you can flank them and maybe cause some havoc. The exception to these situations is, of course, if you want to protect an ally and your win condition in team fights is like making sure that you have an ADC or a mage that stays alive, then you can actually like sit next to them and make sure that you don't get dove on. But other than that, always try to find a flank position with Warwick. Personally, I think the first thing you should understand when you're learning a new champion is their power curve. When you're strong and when you're weak, when should you try to make plays to snowball a lead and end the game, or when should you just be patient and farm up? I'll try to help you visualize this power curve by using a scale of 1 to 5 for each stage of the game, but keep in mind that this is just kind of all hypothetical and generalized. These numbers are made up to give you an idea of how strong you should generally feel on this champion. That's the point of this section. I always hear a lot of people say that Warwick is an early game champion, which is blatantly not true. But he still does fine early on. He's still able to pressure the map, but generally this is the time where you want to try to establish yourself. You don't want to take any big risks. This isn't when you're going to try to like actually force plays. Last season, in Season 9, he struggled actually a lot in the first 5 minutes of the game, but in the new jungle in Season 10, there's plenty of opportunities to make plays because you can start looking for ganks level 3 since your lanes will be likely under leveled compared to you because they'll be level 2, you'll be level 3, and you can also 1v1 mini junglers. Now you're probably not going to want to constantly invade early on since you won't have a way out once you commit. I mean, you are Warwick at the end of the day, but Warwick has solid, well-rounded pressure on the map once he gets each of his basic abilities. Once you get your Tiamat, the way the game goes will usually just kind of depend on if the enemy champions, like the enemy laners, are gankable, unlike champions like Vlad or Morgana, and if the enemy jungler is stronger than you, or if your team is just behind in general. There's a lot of factors in solo queue that can cause you to not really be able to pressure the map, but Tiamat definitely adds a lot to Warwick since it allows you to not only farm and counter jungle significantly faster, but allows him to push out lanes quicker, as well as just in addition to providing more burst to your combos since you can Q plus Tiamat and you just have extra AD as well. If you aren't playing versus mini counters and the game is stable at this point, you should be able to start racking up leads, finding yourself some small advantages. Warwick is an absolute mid-game monster. He easily has one of the strongest mid-game power spikes in the jungle, and even in the game after he completes his first jungle item, especially if he's building warrior. Your dueling just becomes insane, your skirmishing becomes unmatched because of your high DPS, burst, healing, and tankiness. And if you're going, depending on your route, you'll either have the damage to be able to punish enemies with Warrior, while the enemies won't have the damage yet in order to punish you, or you'll be tanky enough to force dives and engages with Cinderhawk. Regardless of the build though, the mid game is when you want to start making things happen, and you usually should be able to do that quite a bit since you're just really strong at this point in the game. You can do this by constantly keeping up in farm by killing camps in seconds, invading the enemy jungler to threaten duels or skirmishes, ganking laners, especially those who are isolated, and taking objectives for your team. There's multiple ways in which you can generate leads and pressure the map with Warwick in the mid game. When your ultimate or your flash is up, you should probably be looking for a kill opportunity somewhere on the map. And I don't want to really make you guys super cocky by acting like you can 1v5 when you're behind or anything like that. Sometimes you have to just kind of sit back and let your team scale. As always, pay attention to your win condition and just pay attention to the actual game situation. But if you find yourself power farming your own jungle often around this time in the game, then you probably aren't making good use of Warwick in general. A lot of people think that Warwick's late game is really, really bad and he falls off hard, which is true sometimes. But other times it actually couldn't be more wrong. It all just comes down to team compositions at the end of the day. So sometimes Warwick will literally be useless other than for soaking damage in fights. And this is mainly versus teams with a lot of hard CC or just specific counters like Olaf or something like that. Or Warwick can take down 3 or more enemies by himself because he is hard to kill and he has the ability to stick onto his targets and just maul them down. But generally I would say that overall his late game is mediocre and nothing special, but he'll still provide some usefulness at the end of the day to his team despite not being able to solo carry fights. Dive is great if you have the damage to either kill an enemy carry that is a threat, or if you are fed and you just want to pick people off without getting focused down too fast. It works especially well if you're building damage, but even full tank Warwick can definitely look to kill the enemy ADC or mage or whoever's in the backline if the opportunity arises. When you're diving, you want to make sure that you have the position to reach the backline. A common mistake that people will make in Warwick is they try to run straight through the center of the enemy team every single time, even when they're fed and they need to make an impact in the fight, or they're just too weak to even absorb meaningful spells before they just die. So you're going to need to learn how to flank from the side or from behind and find the correct time in order to go in. The first person to engage the fight will usually be targeted first, so if you're building Warrior, or you're just generally just a threat, you generally don't want to engage first unless you have immediate follow-up or you're picking off a lone target, or else you're just going to get kited and die. But at the end of the day, remember, it just all comes down to situation, so read the situation. The timing and position of the engage are just as important as the engage itself. That said, flash is your best friend for getting onto the carries guaranteed, and your ultimate of course can be used, but it's hard to reliably hit it in a team fight and also for it to just not get cancelled by CC, so I prefer to save it as follow-up if possible. I want to try to preserve it and try to get onto them without having to use my ultimate. So use your Q in order to follow flashes, dashes, and avoid displacements, Warwick 101 stuff. But the enemy team comp has a large impact as to how you actually play out fights, so plan ahead and just try to think about how you can expect to use your Q and R to avoid CC and follow mobility spells. Try to think what the enemy team is going to do in a team fight. Try to think how they're going to react. Diving in unprotected carry is very easy, but diving one that has loads of shields and peel and teammates using brains can be a pain for sure. So only dive if it will work, and I keep repeating this, but I have the lowest expectations for League of Legends players. Warwick functions best when you have someone to dive with. Your damage is pretty good, and I do kind of say that optimistically, but you don't burst as hard as other assassins or bruisers, especially if the enemy team has a lot of tools to deal with you. So having a partner to either follow up your dive, like a Kennen, or someone that you can follow up, like a Jax, is ideal. If you find that you're diving alone and you're getting peeled off too well and you end up dying before you can get close to anyone, then just change your strategy and choose another role in the team fight. Anti-dive is probably Warwick's best role, when the opportunity arises, since you have a lot of dueling power and CC to prevent enemy divers and assassins from killing your carries, and you don't have to commit your cooldowns or health bar to get to the back line like you do with dive. It's just a little bit less risky. This is the role you'll take if you want to deal with champions like Xin Zhao, Katarina, Yasuo, Irelia, and many more who are a threat to your team. Your single target damage is good, and your E allows you to prevent the burst that these champions have if they try to turn and kill you. Your fear and your ultimate make it easy to pin down these relatively squishy divers and ruin their combos as well. And in addition, assassins and divers usually rely on their mobility to escape, so champions like Katarina or Zed won't be able to get out if you time your Q correctly. Also, some divers have stealth as a defensive tool, so like an example would be like Talon or Kha'Zix, but since your ult reveals stealth, if you use it correctly, you can make them free kills if they commit too deep. This is the role that people are generally familiar with Warwick, as it's all about ulting to start a fight and using your E to soak spells and CC while your carries deal damage from the back. You'll usually do this more if you were going tank Warwick obviously, but there's definitely situations in which you'll want to engage or frontline for your team regardless of the build. The conditions that determine if you want to frontline are as follows. You don't do enough damage to kill anyone and your teammates have plenty of damage themselves. This is usually going to be if you're very behind and your goal in a team fight is to soak spells and CC so that your teammates can take over a fight and, carry you. You're playing against a team that hard counters you and prevents you from ever diving in the backline or ever having an impact to begin with. These comps include multiple champions with a ton of CC or abilities that negate what Warwick wants to do in the first place. So for example, Morgana, Twisted Fate, and Olaf all on the same team. If you're going to be useless, you might as well try to soak CC and just tank for your team in general. An important enemy champion is called out, such as an ADC, and you can pick them off with your ult engage. And for you, in the last point, you have the opportunity to get a big AoE fear off with your E plus R combo, and your team can follow it up very easily. There's definitely more situations where you can look to engage a fight or frontline for your team. These are the most common circumstances that I run into. And it definitely can be good in certain situations, but I just want to emphasize that you don't have to handicap yourself into thinking this is the only way that Warwick can play out fights. That's kind of the point of this section, is to show you guys how I differentiate my playstyle in team fights. I still utilize this playstyle, sometimes, but diving is a little bit better sometimes. There's multiple options you have, so keep that in mind. The last and the least common role that I take on in a team fight is peel, which is simply just CCing and getting in the face of whoever's trying to kill the teammate that you're trying to protect. So for example, if you have a super fed ADC or a mage in your team that your team relies on to deal damage in order to win the team fights, then you should just focus on protecting them at all costs. And you can kind of see how this is similar to anti-dive, but the main difference is that you aren't focused on killing one target. Rather, you are focused on protecting your one carry. You're standing on top of that one guy and making sure that no one touches him. You don't want to overchase or greed for kills. You just want to make sure that the enemies have no opportunities to secure a kill on your main carry. Like everything in the playstyle section, these roles are just generalized and they won't tell you how to specifically play out every single fight. Oftentimes, I'll switch between my team fight roles depending on the game situation, how fed I am, and what the team needs. Adapt your playstyle and utilize your mechanics to the max so that you can be hard to peel off. And if there's anything that I want to stress with this section, it's that positioning, timing, and planning matters a lot when you're team fighting with Warwick. Before I conclude this guide, I just want to talk about some of Warwick's bugs and problems because 1, hardly anything has been fixed since his release 3 years ago. And then 2, there's actually a lot of misinformation as to what bugs Warwick has, which is something that I've concluded since multiple clips hit the front page of the leaked subreddit regarding Warwick. And the top comments have just been complaining about bugs that don't even exist, which is something that I'm kind of okay with since, every misplay I've ever made is of course just a bug. But seriously, Riot, just please help us out here for once. And I'm not going to talk about every single Warwick bug since I don't plan on this video going on for another 18 hours, but I will talk about the most important, most impactful ones that I think that Riot should at least attempt to fix. And then afterwards, I'll talk about some quality of life problems and issues that Warwick has, since they aren't technically bugs, but they definitely hinder him from being better in higher elo. One small bug with Warwick that might technically fall into the quality of life category is the fact that Warwick's fear disarms him for about half a second. It's super easy to reproduce, and it makes it awkward when you're trying to fight enemies, since you can cast E when dueling someone, and then have your auto attack get cancelled when your fear goes off. Obviously, you can just end your E in between auto attacks, which is something that I do, but it's still pretty awkward and annoying, and it feels bad on a champion that likes to auto attack a lot, like Warwick. Another bug with Warwick is his ultimate, and it's more conditional, but it makes QSS a lot stronger versus Warwick than it really should be. Essentially, every time Warwick ult a target and they use QSS, the channel doesn't break for Warwick in a really bad way, meaning he is stunned for the duration of the ultimate without dealing damage, healing, or CCing his target. With how QSS works, his ultimate should just cancel when it's cleansed off instead of just stunning himself. The attack speed on his W is also weird, since you sometimes don't get it right away on low health enemies. Instead, you have to attack once and then you get the attack speed, which just seems like really bad coding, and it feels super clunky. Now, I'm not really sure how they managed to code a champion like Philios, but with that in mind, I feel like that they can make Warwick's attack speed update automatically. Right? Could sell the fix in a skin or something. I feel like that could be a good motive. But overall, the biggest and the most obnoxious bug with Warwick is with his blood trail. Now, technically, there are two bugs, with the second one being his blood trail going in the opposite direction of his target, but this one's pretty rare and it's seemingly random, and I don't know how to reproduce it. But the main one is his blood trail getting body blocked by enemy champions. So what happens is essentially Warwick is supposed to gain movement speed towards marked targets, but if an enemy champion above half health stands in the way of you and the marked enemy, you'll end up losing the movement speed bonus. This means that Warwick loses his movement speed a fair amount when trying to clean up a team fight, or when trying to move across the map, especially when moving towards bot lane, since a full health support can just stand in the way of a low health ADC. So this bug just makes Warwick's W somewhat unreliable and prevents him from doing what Warwick just wants to do in the first place, aka chasing people. It's easy to reproduce, and it happens pretty regularly as well, so Riot should really get on that one. Overall, these are the only really annoying and consistent bugs that I can think of that cause problems. Some other ones could include his ultimate. There's this one where his ultimate gets immediately canceled by blinks and flashes. It just stops midair and just is pretty rare. It's super buggy, but it's super rare, too rare for it to be a big issue. And also, there's one where Warwick doesn't dash with his Q when you hold it, and vice versa. And I think some people deal with this one a decent amount. I don't really deal with it that much. I'm going to have to assume that it has something to do with your clicking pattern, but personally I don't have to deal with that bug that much. But other than these ones, there aren't really any more annoying bugs in Warwick. Warwick's Q isn't really a crazy bug like a lot of people think it is. It's just takes some getting used to. And his ultimate's fine, it just has kind of a weird animation and a weird hitbox. Warwick following dashes and ignoring CC enemies always tell me it's a bug, but they're just being salty. But anyways, the QOL changes that I believe need to happen on Warwick, quality of life, before anything, is for his ultimate to not get cancelled by the target he is ulting. Especially if they cast buffered abilities. This is something that happens all the time, and it's really annoying. It might sound like I'm just being salty, because enemies are timing their abilities well to outplay me, but trust me, that's not really the case. I mean, I'm salty, but for a different reason. Literally half the time my ult gets cancelled, it's by complete accident on the enemy's part, and by abilities that I didn't even know could even cancel my ult to begin with. I've had my ult canceled because Syndra cast E when my ult hit her, and I've had it canceled by random shit like Sejuani Q. I don't understand how the fuck that works. This means that every time you use your ultimate as Warwick on 95% of the roster, there's a 20% chance it gets randomly canceled, and those are random numbers, but you kind of get the idea. There's just a high chance of you're all getting canceled randomly throughout the game before it actually gets to do anything. And it's dumb because Warwick's ult already has so much risk attached to it. That's the big thing here. You literally throw yourself at the enemy team, no turning back, and a skill shot that can be dodged, with the ability for it to be canceled by your target's allies, and it can get QSS. So there's a lot of counters to it already, so the fact that like the person you're ulting can just buffer an ability and cancel it is kind of bullshit. Warwick's ultimate isn't bad by design or anything like that, it's just super unreliable because of this, which is obviously awful for high elo or pro play. I think that Warwick's ult should be able to, shouldn't be able to get canceled at all by the target he suppressed, but at the bare minimum, he should at least be immune for the first like 0.5 seconds or something when he's ulting a target. Alright, what's up guys? We finally managed to reach the end of this very, very long YouTube video. Hour and a half long. I know it's kind of against the YouTube meta to post something this long. Normally it's like 10-minute videos trying to farm views. But it says a lot if you are willing to sit through this for the entire duration of the video to learn about my favorite champion and Warwick. And hopefully you found something informative or entertaining in this guide. Whether or not you are someone who is interested in playing Warwick at the end of this, or someone who just, just watch it just because. Really do appreciate it. This video was a lot of effort on my part. I'll just talk about this briefly because guys probably don't care, but I actually spent about 100 hours on this video total when you consider the fact that I started this in Season 8 and I was initially trying to release it in Season 9, but I scrapped it because there were some sections I wasn't very happy about. One of the main goals with this guide was to make the best guide ever, best League of Legends guide, best Warwick guide, whatever, ever. And I don't think I necessarily made the best guide ever because I kind of lack the editing skills and the guide making skills in general just to make something like that. But I'm pretty happy with the video overall, just given the fact that I did make sure that all the information in the guide was actually, at least somewhat correct, at least had valuable opinions. I didn't try to bullshit you in any way, shape, or form. And like I said, I initially was planning on releasing this last year, but I had a lot of bullshit in it. I was kind of like just filling time, and I knew that you guys would not appreciate that, or at least maybe you guys wouldn't be able to see it, but I saw it, so I had to change things up. And yeah, 14,000 words later in the script, and we got this baby. So very, very happy about that. One of the main reasons as to why I wanted to make this guide, actually the main reason as to why I wanted to make this guide in the first place is and I did mention it throughout the video, but Warwick has kind of a bad reputation in the League of Legends community. And I kind of wanted to help try to fix that because I want people to see the fun in this champion. And, this champion's been out for 3 years and his reputation's hardly changed. People still have are just, misinformed about what he's capable of, what he's about. People who truly would enjoy this champion, who really, really would love to play Warwick, oftentimes don't have the opportunity to actually pick him up because when they think of Warwick, all they think of is someone who builds full tank. They don't know that you can build warrior, build damage, and carry games. They don't know that you can dive in team fights. They don't know about Q mechanics and stuff like that. So I just want to try to kind of share the love of this champion. I think there's a lot of people out there who would enjoy Warwick. And I did mention that multiple times, but I really do believe it. He is underrated in his current state, for sure. And it probably should take my word on that as well, because before I was actually a Warwick main, I was a Gangplank one trick and a Katarina one trick for 3 years. Well, I was a Gangplank one trick from Season 5 to the Katarina one trick, the Katarina rework, and then when the Katarina rework came out, I one tricked her until the Warwick rework came out. But those are very flashy, fun, explosive champions. That was what I was into. And when Warwick rework came out, I thought I was just going to play him for a couple days because he was new, but I actually stuck to him because I saw the potential in this champion. And 3 years later, I still play this champion, even though I still like flashy champions. Now, I do also kind of like brain dead champions sometimes, but I would never be able to play any other, basic champion for 3 years straight. So that just tells you that Warwick isn't he isn't like one of the simple champions, and to that extent, you know. He's got a more of a skill cap. He's got more playmaking potential, and that's kind of what I want to share and try to express. But yeah, so if anyone wants to, you know, keep up with me in any way, shape, or form, by the off chance you do, like I said, I stream on twitch.tv/lolparnellyx. I'm trying to get it, I did mention I'm trying to get it changed to just twitch.tv/Parnellyx this summer, so it's summer of 2020. But it'll take some time for me to get a name change. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that this guide was very, very extensive, in depth, actually comprehensive, unlike the other guides. I was kind of inspired by some other guides in the past, like I Keep It Taco's Gin guide. It was a written guide, but I wanted to take it to another level after that. RTO made a really good Renekton guide series. And then Fogged made a good Tryndamere guide series, of course. So those are the kind of guides I was looking after. I really do respect One Tricks who are able to, or just any content creator that's willing to put this much effort into something for the community. So I wanted to try to follow suit, and I am trying to get more into streaming now. So it is worth noting, if you're interested in watching my stream, go check that out. If you're not, then obviously don't. It's fine. Besides that, my YouTube, I have been basically MIA on YouTube for the last like solid year. This is my first video I've uploaded in well, it's not my first video in a while, but I've hardly uploaded in the last year. I'm trying to change that though. I'm a college student, so I can only really prioritize streaming. Like I can't like do a bunch of YouTube and a bunch of Twitch, but I want to try to do some YouTube, get some informative content out there, kind of like what Tarzan's channel looks like. I got a new editor who was Risty, the High Elo Garen main Twitch streamer. One of his old editors reached out to me, so I'm going to collaborate with him, and maybe we can try to release some good informative videos. And that's the plan. It might not be like a daily thing or even a weekly thing, but hopefully I can do something. So you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, of course, if that interests you. And then other ways you can find me: Twitter. Twitter.com/Parnellyx. I don't really like tweet about like, I don't know. I don't really tweet related to like my quote unquote brand, I guess. I just kind of actually say my thoughts on Twitter, league related thoughts. I don't really talk about work or like talk directly to my community. I probably should to an extent, but I don't really know what I'm going to do with that. But I am pretty active on Twitter, so you can follow me there if you want, if you think my tweets aren't completely garbage. And then lastly, my Discord. If you, and this is really important, because if you actually want to, you know, keep up with me in some way, shape, or form, definitely join my Discord, because that's where I communicate with my community the most. And assuming I'm not streaming, obviously I'm not streaming all the time, so I talk to people who watch my stream, my viewers, all the time on my Discord. I answer questions and stuff like that, so you can go ahead and give that a go, and I'll have that in the description below. But yeah, so let's wrap this up. Thank you very much for watching the entire way through. Let me know how you liked it. If it's not, if some parts of it weren't good, some parts of this video weren't good, like that's honestly expected. I've never made anything like this before. I've never made a long YouTube video, so I actually take criticism pretty well, as long as it's not like, you know, you're not shitting on me. So let me know in the comments how you feel about that, or anywhere else you can contact me. And yeah, I just hope that I was able to inspire some people to play Warwick, or inspire some people to see the fun in this champion, and open the eyes of other people as to what the champion's capable of. So appreciate that, and I hope you guys have really good games in the future and you learn something. And I hope you have a good day, and fuck Riven, that champ's bullshit.